Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm doing another video here of from Jago Hazard. Um, just watched a first video of his the other day, and you guys were familiar with him and saying that he usually did railway stuff. So I went back and I found this one, which is what's wrong with Paddington Station. I thought this would be interesting. I loved his video that I just watched the other day. um, just really well done, and I enjoy the images and the history and the architecture that it was shown in that one. Hopefully, there's some of that here, but I will link this video in the description along with links over to Patreon and a link of how you can support the channel here on YouTube. But yeah, let's just go ahead and jump right into it.
I don't know how familiar you are with Paddington Tube Station, but it's a bit of a mess. I mean, even on the tube map it's a mess. Look at that, it's on the Circle line twice. It boasts the longest distance between lines for interchange. You have the Hammersmith and City line on one side, the Elizabeth line on the other side, and the District and Bakerloo lines on another side again. And a giant railway terminus lying between all of them. How did we get here? And how do we get out? Please, I'm lost. The main line terminus was built by the Great Western Railway and
Wow.
first opened in 1838. Paddington was chosen as a location simply because it was cheap. Back then, this area was relatively undeveloped. Paddington was seen as almost on the outskirts of London, although I don't think anyone would call it that now. The Great Western Railway was a main line originally.
I just love, I mean, I like that he's telling us history of stuff. It looked beautiful to me, the station. But I just love seeing these old buildings and the streets and the murals. I love it.
Intended to connect London with the harbour at Bristol. It was very successful, and by the start of the 20th century there were trains running from Paddington all over the West Country, Wales, and the Midlands. It was one of a number of termini that opened up around London. The big problem was that they'd been forbidden from getting right into the middle of London by the Royal Commission on Railway Termini of 1846. So proper interchange was impossible. Even travelling between the termini was a pain in the backside thanks to the gridlocked roads. The MP Charles Pearson proposed an underground railway which would get around the Royal Commission's rules. Or rather, under them. The line was to be known as the North Metropolitan Railway, then just the Metropolitan Railway, and it would connect London's northern termini. That was Paddington, Euston and King's Cross, plus it would give access to Smithfield for goods traffic. St Pancras and Marylebone didn't exist yet. The Great Northern Railway, who owned King's Cross, and the Great Western Railway were very keen to get access to this new line. The London and North Western Railway, who owned Euston, were not interested, and to this day Euston Station and Euston Square, on the old Metropolitan line, are completely separate.
That's so funny how that Houston. I just was thinking, oh, it's like an accent. He's saying Houston, like with an H, and it's Houston with an E.
Technically, Paddington Station and Paddington Metropolitan Railway Station were also completely separate, even though they were right next door to each other. Paddington Main Line Station was just Paddington, but the Met Station was Paddington Bishop's Road, located on what's now Bishop's Bridge Road. I appreciate that this poster appears to disagree with me. Despite this, the Metropolitan line was connected directly to the GWR line for the simple reason that the GWR would be operating the railway with their own rolling stock. They even built tank engines specifically designed for this line. The GWR used an unusually broad track gauge of 7 feet and 1/4 inch, which meant that the Metropolitan also had to be to that gauge. But it also had to include a third inner rail to enable the Great Northern Railway's standard gauge rolling stock on there, the Great Northern having also paid for a connection. The whole shebang opened in 1863. In 1864, a new branch line opened. This was a joint venture between the GWR and the Metropolitan, and was known as the Hammersmith and City Railway. These days, the Hammersmith and City line is a separate entity on the tube map, but until 1991 it was always viewed either as a Metropolitan line branch or a Great Western/Metropolitan line branch. This is why the old Metropolitan railway station at Paddington is now a Hammersmith and City line station, and this is also why there are benches with a GWR monogram at Hammersmith. The Metropolitan Railway's engineer, John Fowler, didn't want to stop at Paddington. He envisaged connecting all London's termini together with a great circular line, an inner circle. A circle line, if you like. There was an extension to Moorgate already planned. In 1864, 3 more extensions were authorised. One would go from Moorgate to Tower Hill, or Mark Lane as the station would be known, but that's another story. Another would be built by a separate company, the Metropolitan District Railway, and would go from Tower Hill to Gloucester Road. And the third, and the one most relevant to us, would go from Paddington to Gloucester Road. Paddington Bishop's Road was not very conveniently located for the Circle line. The Met preferred to follow the line of the streets overhead wherever possible, and that was because their line was built using a method known as cut and cover. It involved digging a trench, laying the track, and covering it over again. Obviously, it also required the demolition of anything in the way, so following the roads was cheaper than buying up houses. Continuing the line from Bishop's Road would have involved a lot of demolition to get it back on course, including digging up the Great Western Main Line. So instead, the Circle would branch off on Praed Street and continue southwest that way. But obviously they still wanted a station at Paddington, so they built one on Praed Street, next to, but not attached to, the station. That opened in 1868. By this time, the GWR and the Metropolitan had had a bit of a tiff, and the Met was now its own thing, operating its own trains. So now there were 2 Metropolitan railway stations serving Paddington. But of course these days, Praed Street is not a Metropolitan line station either. So what gives? Well, the Metropolitan District Railway was supposed to become part of the Metropolitan Railway. In fact, in terms of the number of high-up staff the 2 companies shared, it practically was part of the Metropolitan. Unfortunately, the district section of the Circle turned out to be more expensive to build than anticipated, and the Met didn't much fancy the idea of acquiring all that debt. So they pulled out in 1870, and that is why there is a separate district line. Anyway, as part of this divorce, the 2 companies would get joint custody of the Circle line. The district ran the anti-clockwise service, and the Metropolitan would run the clockwise service. The district would also run trains that terminated at Edgware Road. In 1933, the Metropolitan and District lines, and nearly all of the other tube lines for that matter, would be amalgamated into London Transport. In 1949, the new management decided that the Circle line would officially become its own distinct thing. The services through Praed Street, which had hitherto been the joint responsibility of the Metropolitan and District lines, were now just Circle line services. The District line Edgware Road services remained District line. But I've jumped ahead because, as I say, this story is complicated. In 1913, the Bakerloo line arrived at Paddington. This was a 3rd tube station, more or less opposite.
I guess, I know London's major city. So I think of it with these railways kind of in terms like I would like New York City, where there's all these underground um, uh, trains and stuff that people, really use. Most of the U.S. and I don't know if it's kind of the same there. Um, you don't really have these around Charlotte. They had been talking about building one for years and years and years in one spot down what's known as 74 going into uptown Charlotte, and then there was one towards the south side um, that you could ride up. It was actually called South Boulevard, but they had a transit that you could jump on and ride it straight up to uptown. So usually, like if we go to Panthers games, where it's just so busy and parking is expensive, and you're going to spend an hour trying to get out of any kind of parking deck because it's packed. We would usually park at the end of South Boulevard, jump on the train, ride it all the way up, and then you walk. I don't know, it's probably less than 10 minutes from the station to walk to the stadium. Um, that's usually what we would do if we went to a game. Now, if there were instances where if it was super packed, like the games have been this year, um, especially towards the end of the year, because we were very close to playoffs right now. Um, y- you're gonna have a time because trying to get back on that train is absurd. It's so packed that you people can't get on at the stops. So there's been one or two times after games where I'm like, I'm not gonna sit here for 2 hours waiting for a train where you can get on. So I'll end up like getting an Uber or Lyft or something and just take that back back to where my car is parked at. Because then, after that, where we lived, you still had to drive about 40 minutes back to the house. So after the game and walking and doing all, you still gotta drive. Um, but most areas just don't have this kind of transportation. So I think it's really cool. I think, like, I've never even been to New York and had the opportunity to take those trips, but that's one thing that I want to do when I go to New York is try to figure that out, and especially go to some of these old train stations and stuff that I just think it's so neat. Back in West Virginia, where I'm from, it's a huge coal state even now. Um, they have the CSX railroad, and that's a huge employer in the state, or at least in the city that I was at. My uncle worked for them until he retired, and there was always trains come through coal. Yeah, but we had a train station right there in the city. I just think they're really cool. And they have like old trains everywhere. We used to take the train up to the New River Gorge every year. They would do um, bungee jumping off of the bridge and stuff. It was cool. So trains are a big part of like where I'm from. I just think they're really cool. I think they're really interesting. I need to take my son.
Opposite Praed Street, next to the main line station, and a bit of a hike from Bishop's Road. The Bakerloo line was a far more modern line than the District or the Metropolitan. It was a deep-level electric tube designed to provide direct connections. No politicking, no showboating, no messing around. So their station that served Paddington was just called Paddington. The Bakerloo, too, was absorbed into London Transport in 1933. One of
Is this what Paddington Bear comes from? Huh.
London Transport's tasks was turning the many different forms of public transport built and operated by many different companies into a coherent network. So the year they took over, they renamed Bishop's Road to simply Paddington. They did the same to Praed Street in 1947. And so, as far as your average commuter was concerned, the three tube stations became one. The one remaining part of the puzzle is, why is Paddington on the Circle line twice? Well, because a circle is a difficult shape to operate. There's no end of the line. If a train is delayed by 5 minutes, then every train behind it is delayed by 5 minutes. Potentially, all the way up until the end of the day. There's no space to catch up. Now, on an end-to-end line, you can work a bit of extra time into the timetable. So if your train is scheduled to wait for 8 minutes at the terminus, but it's held up by 5 minutes, then that's no problem. It just means that the waiting time at the terminus is reduced to 3 minutes, but it can still leave on time. For this reason, the Circle Line was extended in 2009, running over the Hammersmith and City Line to Hammersmith. So it's no longer actually a circle, but it also passes through both the old Praed Street and Bishop's Road stations, depending which direction you go in. Now, to be honest, I don't think the situation at Paddington becomes any less confusing when you explain it. In fact, it becomes even more confusing. It's a mess of railway politics and a lack of forward planning. In fact, now I come to think of it, I've barely even mentioned the Elizabeth Line platforms. But if you want a short answer as to why Paddington is such a mess for changing trains, some Victorians did it, and now we're stuck with it.
Pretty much.
Well,
Oh,
I do
that's
hope you enjoyed
cool.
this spaced out tale from the tube.
That's neat. I need to like some I go on like one of the trains or whatever in Charlotte. I need to like video it. And there's like a big deal like a couple months ago, and the president threw a whole little fit about it and blamed immigrants, but there was like a killing on the train that we usually would take. And then it became national news because then he starts blaming immigrants for it because it was like, I don't know. But it's just like, how can anything that he could blame an entire group of people?
If you did, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. If you'd like to try your hand at making more sense of this than I did, I used A History of the Metropolitan Railway by Bill Simpson, Volume 1, London's Underground Station by Lawrence Minnier, Great Western Suburban Services by Thomas Peacock, and A History of London Transport by T.C. Barker and Michael Robbins.
Are they pretty good at like checking tickets and stuff? Because I know the one in Charlotte is awful to say, but I like very rarely would buy tickets for it. Like I would in the beginning when we would use it, and then I kind of stopped like marking them as used in the app, and so I would just hang on to them in case somebody came around. But I've never had anybody come around and ask for the tickets. I never even saw anybody that worked there. Um, in that train, it was just a line, so it would go from one end to the other one end and just go back and forth all day long. Um, I don't even know what the times where you just show up and wait. It would come pretty quickly usually, or when you got up there, it was there waiting. But I liked it. I always liked doing the transit like that. Much better than riding like a bus or something. But yeah, I really enjoyed that video. I thought it was interesting. I don't know half of what he's talking about as far as where the places are, the issues that they're having. I just like the images and all that, and a little bit of backstory to it. I just think it's interesting. I think it's cool. If you guys want to add anything to it, some context or uh, anything like that, tidbits about it, your experiences, please do so in the comments. I always enjoy reading those. And yeah, hit the like button, hit subscribe, share, hype, all that stuff, and have an awesome, awesome day. Thanks for watching with me, guys.